Welcome to Americana Archives. Today's headline is Indian War History. The subheadline is Reminiscences of Old Strike the Ree, Old Dakota, and their contemporaries in the early part of the present century. This article was written by Creep Easy of Calamity Farm. It says, To the Press and Dakotian, we received for your weekly issue of the 9th the announcement of the death of Old Strike the Ree, the famous chief of the Yankton Indians at the advanced age of 96 years. Thinking that reminiscences of some of the war and hunting exploits of Old Strike, wherein he gained the famous name of Strike the Ree, might perhaps be of interest to your readers, I will relate them as they were told to me by Old Dakota, an old French trapper in the spring of 1865. Old Dakota's story. It was my good fortune during the month of March 1865, while hunting and trapping on the Jim River near the present site of Olivet, to fall in with Old Dakota, an old French trapper, under these circumstances. 3 of us, William Root, Joseph Carpenter, and myself, had during the month of February gone up the James River to a point near the mouth of Firesteel Creek to hunt and trap beaver. Meeting with indifferent success, and learning that a band of Indians was located a short distance above us, we moved farther down the river and joined the old Frenchman. Few men had seen more than he had of the wild life of the Great West. He had hunted with the Shoshones of the Pacific coast. He had been chased by the Crows and Blackfeet near the headwaters of the Yellowstone, had held high carnival in the bullpens of Mexico, had worked for the American Fur Company, had ranged all through the Black Hills, Wind River, and Bighorn Mountains as a free trapper, and had lived and traded with the Indians of this territory so long that he had received the well-merited sobriquet of Old Dakota. He was a character of note himself, old and passionate, piercing black eyes, which would dilate while he sucked furiously at his old pipe, and related his marvelous and soul-stirring narratives of adventure in the Wild West. But his recollections of adventure, while on the Missouri River near Old Fort Rice, when with Old Strike the Ree, were by far the most interesting to me, owing to the fact that the old chief was then encamped on the river a short distance from where we were. I will relate this characteristic and singular story as it was told me, as nearly as I can from memory. It appears that Old Dakota, who was then a young man, had been trapping west of the Missouri River, and had come into winter quarters on the Missouri to dispose of his furs and spend the winter months in recreation and dissipation. Among the Indians who came and located around Fort Rice when the tribe paid their visit to trade with the white men was a young and buxom Indian girl, who after 1 or 2 interviews took forcible possession of the young Frenchman's heart. Nothing was more common and according to the habits than to marry this fair denizen of the wilds. But alas, the young damsel's father refused to part with the girl unless the Frenchman gave him a good horse in exchange. Unfortunately, the young trapper had parted with all his hard year's earnings, ere his heart was taken by storm. The custom with the Indians was to receive in consideration of exchanges for the parents' use something of equal marketable value with the daughter. The usual course was for the swain to select his best horse, lead him to the teepee of the fair one's parents, tie him to a post, and walk away. If upon examination the horse was accepted, an interview ensued, and matters were soon brought to a final issue. If, on the contrary, the girl was considered more valuable, other presents were required ere the relatives could be persuaded to part with the girl. Unluckily, the young Frenchman had squandered his earnings in expensive luxuries and the enjoyments of high living, chief of which was poor whiskey and tobacco, which brings so many of these stalwart and hardy pioneers to premature death. He had not the wherewithal to buy a horse, and without a horse he cannot secure the maiden as his wife. The trapping season was long since over, and it lacked a month of the new time of starting. However, the young trapper shouldered his gun, and left the comforts and amusements of Fort Rice to seek the haunts of wild game, hoping to raise by the laborious prosecution of the chase the means of winning the Indian girl from her relatives. In the pursuit of game, he wandered over much ground, and in due time he appeared on the north bank of the Cannonball River with a goodly supply of furs. 2 months had been passed in trapping, when following a new path, the adventurous trapper entered a deep and woody glen. Pushing his way through, he at length came out on the edge of an open glade near the mouth of the north bank of the Cannonball. Raising his eyes for an instant, the trapper backed into the woods and paused to reflect. An exclamation of surprise followed this action. He had discovered a mystic lodge of the Yankton Indians. To explain his conduct, we must glance at the peculiar customs of these Indians at that time. No young Indian brave, though his father was the bravest of the tribe, could rank himself among the warriors and be entitled to marry or enjoy the many other rights of citizenship until he performed some act of daring and intrepidity. In early spring, therefore, the young men of proper age would band themselves together in small companies and take to the woods, like the knight-errants of old, in search of adventure and peril. Having found out a secret and retired spot, they formed a huge conical-shaped hut, constructed of poles and branches of trees, of from 20 to 30 feet high, lashed together at the top with strips of rawhide. Buffalo heads, furs, kettles, scalps, and other offerings are hanged up inside of this rude temple, as offerings to the Great Spirit. And after many days of feasting, dancing, and mystic rites, the hut is abandoned, the vow is taken, and the band starts on their campaign. Death is the sure portion of him who shall be known to enter and desecrate it during their absence. Upon one of these mystic lodges, the young Frenchman had stumbled, and various were the reflections suggested in his mind. Within the lodge were articles doubtless of more than sufficient value to purchase the necessary horse. Yet, in spite of the temptation, the young trapper had too much honor to rob the Indian temple, and was about to move away, when a hand was laid on his shoulder, and a young brave stepped out from behind him and said, "My white brother has the eyes of a lynx and the cunning of a fox. He starts out on his journey early in the season." The hunter laughed as he replied, "My wigwam is empty, and I would make it warm for the sister of the great chief. What luck!" The young brave shook his head gravely as he pointed to his empty belt and said, "5 moons have passed and gone since we left our homes, many miles down the great river, and our hatchet has not yet been raised. The Arakiris are cowards and hide in their wigwams." Without adding anything to this significant hint that none of the warriors had been able to fulfill their vows of spilling blood before their return, the young chief led the way to their camp, many miles below, near the mouth of the Cannonball, where it plunges into the great Missouri River. Between the spot tenanted by the Mandan and Arakiri Indians in those days ran the Cannonball River, a stream of considerable volume. This stream, partaking of the general features of the tributaries of the Missouri, is near its confluence, slow, muddy, and deep. In a diminutive valley near the Missouri, in an open glade, surrounded by cottonwood trees and willows, on a level lawn of prairie grass, the Indian camp was situated. Though the silence of the place was unbroken, 12 young braves were congregated around a fire in the center of the open glade, in the act of partaking of the evening meal. The young Frenchman was cordially received by the braves, and especially so by young Strike, Paulania Pape, as the trapper had given him the previous season the handsomest tomahawk pipe in the tribe. After the customary shaking of hands and salutations of how, the travelers were invited to partake of the evening meal. The request was complied with, and various huge slices of buffalo meat were soon dispatched by the young Frenchman, who then smoked in the tomahawk pipe of his Indian friend, and heard him relate the history of their travels and the failure of the expedition. Among the young braves that sat around the campfire were 2 persons who have since become famous warriors and chiefs of the tribe. They were Paulania Pape, or Strike the Ree, and Tatanka Watako, Crazy Bull. The last named Indian was severely wounded and bruised at the time, he having had a hard tussle with a wounded buffalo bull on the banks of the Dog's Teeth Creek, a tributary of the North Fork of the Cannonball, a few days before. To be continued. Tune back in soon for the second part of this incredible story. This story came from the great state of South Dakota, being reported in the Daily Press and Dakotian of August 13th, 1888. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.